Well, it's all been the most unholy mess over the last few days. The BBC, two major resignations, a huge debate about its future, including the licence fee. And by the way, these people haven't gone because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the final straw that's done it. I think there are many of us that feel that the Hamas statements have been taken as gospel. We've seen decades of bias on immigration, on Europe, on climate change, on net zero. Indeed, 20 years ago, the Wilson Report admitted that the BBC had biases in these areas, and 20 years on, here we are. But to me, the really interesting thing is Donald Trump now threatening to sue the BBC for up to $1 billion. He's going to sue them in Florida unless by Friday he gets what he considers to be a full and frank apology. Is Trump right to sue? It's a really good debate. Let me know your thoughts. #Farage on GB News or email farage@gbnews.com. And I have to say, I did meet Trump on Friday night and spent a few minutes with him. And his basic thought was, is this how you treat your best ally in the world? And I get it, because what Panorama did by putting together two different clips from an hour apart in a speech was totally outrageous. Let's begin by examining the law in America, where it seems to me everyone sues everyone the whole time. I'm joined down the line by George Freeman, Executive Director of the Media Law Resource Centre. George, good evening. America is a far more litigious society than we are, but does Trump actually have grounds, legal grounds, in your view, in Florida to sue the BBC?
I think he has grounds, but I think it's a difficult lawsuit, as most lawsuits brought by public officials or public figures are in the United States, where we have one layer more of protections for the media than in the rest of the world, including the UK. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. The Supreme Court had a similar case about 30 years ago against the New Yorker magazine. And they said that basically there has to be a gross distortion in a case like this for the case to have any sort of legs. And I think one really has to examine the tape that the BBC put on the air and the actual transcript of what Trump said that day to determine whether there was a gross distortion. Even if there was a gross distortion and the meaning was changed substantially, they still have to find actual malice, which is the New York Times v. Sullivan test, which is that was the intent. That was in the mind of the editors who did it, that they didn't do it carefully. They didn't splice these things together just because they were in a hurry or just because it happened to be that way. But they did it knowing that there would be a gross distortion, and they did it anyhow. So that's a tough test. And how do you prove that? So the answer is it's possible, but I think the plaintiff faces a lot of burdens to do so. And I would also just caution too. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm going to say, George, in our country, you can sue for defamation, you can sue for libel, and your top payout will be £1 million or £2 million. I mean, this is $1 billion. I mean, he's rather over-egging the pudding, isn't he?
I think that's meaningless. When I was at the New York Times, it had a philosophy, a rule, that they would never put in a story the damage amount that was being sought in the complaint, because it's a meaningless number. It doesn't mean anything. It's just what a lawyer throws in there. So it's funny. I've seen all these headlines, including yours. It's on the air right now about $1 billion, and it's irrelevant. So it's something the Times thought shouldn't even be published, although I noticed it was published today in their story about this very matter. So, but it doesn't mean anything. So I wouldn't get scared because of that number. In fact, I think proving damages will be very difficult. I mean, a month after this ran, or a couple of weeks after this ran,
he won.
He got 73 million votes and he won the election. So where are the damages? I think that'll be hard to show.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living. And maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind. The more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver, and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
George, I think you're right, and I thank you for joining me down the line. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that point from George Freeman, of course, to sue and win, you have to prove actual harm, and it's going to be rather difficult to do that. But he's angry with the BBC, and do you know what? He's got every right to be angry with the BBC. I'm joined this evening by my usual Tuesday panel of Sir Reynold Jar-Wardner and Joe Phillips. Joe, is he right to sue the BBC?
No, but this is what he would do, isn't it? He's just, he wants to be in the headlines. He wants to write everything in capital letters. It's the equivalent of green ink on lined paper, pressing so hard.
He's very good at it.
Well, yeah, he gets a lot of coverage, but, all spoiled children do. The point is, it wasn't shown in America. It wasn't available because BBC iPlayer is not available in America or not available outside of the UK. Nobody in this country, or as far as I know, anywhere else, complained about it when it was broadcast over a year ago. And I think, given that apparently there were 20 complaints that were upheld about Martine Croxall rolling her eyes about pregnant people, there were no complaints. There is no doubt that it's damaging, and as we discussed last week, it's appalling journalism. And all you needed to do was to put a swipe in the same way as if you were writing it in print, you would put a ... between the two quotes.
Of course, I put the question out there. I'm teasing a bit. Yeah. Of course, it's nonsense. But I get it. He's very, very upset. He's very, and genuinely angry, and he's got every right to be.
No, absolutely.
And we all agree on that. Ed Davey seems to think the BBC can do no wrong. It's an odd position for the Lib Dem leader to take.
Well, the BBC is made up of human beings. It has had some catastrophic errors, and I would say that actually, although this is awful, it is nowhere near on the scale of the Jimmy Savile scandal, which had real victims.
And persisted for years.
And went on for years and years and years, where people were ignored. And there are echoes of the Rotherham grooming gangs and all of that stuff, which we discuss frequently. So on the scale of, 1 to 10, I would say this is probably about 7, if Savile was 10 out of 10. It is an opportunity for the government to really get a grip and the BBC, because the BBC charter is up for renewal 2027. Now, what they need to do, now Tim Davie has gone and Deborah Turness has gone, is actually make sure that the next Director General has got a journalistic background. And what I would do if I was sorting it out is to bring in somebody, a respected broadcast journalist, somebody like Dorothy Byrne, who used to be at Channel 4, come in, do a sort of a Louise Casey type review and get to grips with this overburdensome management structure that ignores people going, hang on a minute,
Reynold, the last time we talked about Nadine Dorries was the Culture Secretary, and she said, look, this is the last time we can go on with the licence fee structure as it is. Fundamental change is needed. But is it going to happen?
Probably not. I think there is a place for a national broadcaster.
But does it need to do entertainment? Does it need to do sport?
Well. So this is the point. So there is I'm sure a role for the BBC going forward, but it does try and compete in too many commercial areas. For example, BBC Radio 1 Extra and whatever else that they might do. There are plenty of commercial radio stations that do the same and probably do it better. But that's not to say the BBC doesn't do some things really well. And so there is probably a role for it. But, this sort of incident isn't just a one-off. And, whether this incident is 7 out of 10 or not, there are so many others that are 7 out of 10.
Trump is the final straw in this.
Yeah.
These errors have been compounding. The licence fee is rumoured to be going up to £181 a year. It just doesn't fit with the modern world, does it?
No, it doesn't, but it is a very tiny amount when you think what you get for that. And, whether you can argue that David Attenborough or Strictly Come Dancing or Celebrity Traitors or all the radio services, whether you like Radio 1 Extra or you want to listen to Radio...
We're paying for a state broadcaster, Joe, on paying to go to prison. I mean, this is...
Yes.
It's the way it's collected.
This is ridiculous.
It's the problem, right? The fact that they have the ability as a private agency to have criminal sanction on people. That is a particular problem. And they're very wasteful in the way they collect it as well.
Yeah, they are wasteful, and it is a ridiculous thing.
It's out of date.
It's out of date. It's a bit like dog licences, which I think are, you used to buy by postal
7
order.
and 6 they were.
7 and 6 postal order. Yeah, thank you. But I think, yes, you're right. It does need looking at, and I think there are very valid questions about the commercial arm of the BBC, because don't forget the programmes that we export, like the David Attenborough series, for instance, brings in money and is incredibly important to the soft power that Britain has around the world.
Well, that's OK, and I get it, but I think actually more important than that is the BBC Foreign Service, which I think has a long history, which of course is not funded by the licence fee. No, it's funded by the Foreign Office.
Exactly.
But don't we need a massively slimmed down BBC, Randall?
We certainly need to slim it down. Quite how far that goes, I don't know, because I'm not in the BBC. I've not looked at this policy in particular detail. But absolutely, the BBC does too much and doesn't do it well enough. And I think it could do less and do it much better. Take the World Service as a brilliant example. It should be there as a beacon for the world over.
Yeah, and soft power.
It should be there as soft power. Unfortunately, too often it talks Britain down. And that's not the soft power that I think we need to be able to articulate around the world. Yet too often the World Service talks Britain down. And that's a great shame. Well, and then when you've got channels like BBC...
Insomniacs at home will have an opinion on the World Service.
I would just say, when we went into COVID lockdown, the BBC... was absolutely brilliant at stepping up immediately with education programmes for kids who are out of school. And that sort of service is, it's there.
Well,
because
we don't mind the public service, we're sick of the bias.
Yes, and I think that's where you
sick of the bias.
You need strong editorial, journalistic...
But isn't the problem the culture within the BBC itself?
But I think somebody said, I can't remember who it was, but who said, it's a small head with a big body. And I think that's true.
You've got a cabal of ideological activists who've been driving, for example, the transport...
Well, you know something, Joe, I discovered yesterday that the former chief executive of Plaid, the Welsh Nationalists, has now become a director at BBC Wales.
Well, there we are.
That just says everything about the ingrained left-wing bias that I see throughout the BBC.
Except you've got Robbie Gibbs.
One person.
You've got one person. Yes.
One person.
But you also had to have Samir Shah to come in to replace Richard Sharp, who was appointed by Boris Johnson, who had to step back from that position because of dubious dealings. Maybe
the more we discuss this, the worse it is.
But it shouldn't be political appointments.
No. Hang on. Because if it wasn't appointed by the Prime Minister of the day, the BBC would appoint its own chairman, and we know where that would go. So at least there is some accountability.
Hey, there is a blessing. It's not Nadine Dorris who thought that Channel 4 was publicly funded when she was culture secretary.
Well, it has a public service broadcasting remit.
Yes, but it's not funded by...
Oh, you see, you can't argue with Liberals. They